I could see there was a lot of questions. I've got one starting question, okay? Because in Denmark, as in the other Nordic countries too, most of the politicians in the parliament thinks if you just put them in a job, they'll automatically learn the language. And your studies say the opposite. It isn't enough to put people in a job. They have to be motivated, but not just the participants, also the workplace have to be motivated. So what do we say to the politicians about this? Well, what do you say?
I've actually done it. I've been to the Danish Parliament with a group of Danish politicians, and I've tried to explain to them that language learning does not take place automatically in a workplace. It needs to be supported in different ways.
Yeah, I just want to supplement that there's actually a big sort of scientific study being done now at the ministry in Denmark, the ministry level, where they're gathering knowledge about basically saying what we've been saying for years. But anyways, the fact that it's reached that level is good. That we've done a study of what is being done all over Denmark in terms of trying to facilitate language learning in the workplace. Yeah. And obviously we provide some good examples of when it does work, but we also give exactly that conclusion that, you know, it doesn't work automatically. This and this and this has to be in place. And I think, you know, having that recognized and having that out there, and that's going to be distributed to municipalities, language schools, companies. So it's going to, I think, be pretty broad, and I think that's going to heighten, I hope that's going to heighten sort of the level of awareness of what it takes and what has to be in place in order for things to happen.
And then perhaps you could also look at it in a wider perspective. If the idea is that you should be able to go into the Danish labor market and have a job and do your job, is work-related language the immediate need? What does the individual learner need to be able to do language-wise and motivation-wise in order for that person to be ready to learn the language of the workplace? So if you say that you should go into the workplace, you should have a job in Denmark, and that means that you've got to learn work-related language, I think that those two things do not match immediately. The individual has got to go through many stages and many kinds of language learning in order for that person to be able to go into the labor market and actually do a job. So there's a kind of shortcut there in the thinking.
Can I have one more question before and so long this? It's interesting that they then say, could you take the formal education, second language, and put it out on the workplace? Well known that the people on the workplace have many different backgrounds. And some others say it's better to have it on the language school and take some from the workplace into the language school. Yeah. Have you got any meaning about that?
Yeah, I think one of the best examples I've seen of language teaching that really helps to do a job was in a center for elderly people. And the language learners which had their trainee period there got language training directly in relation to their trainee period by a very well-qualified language teacher that was able to take out what they needed in the workplace, both cultural-wise and language-wise and so on, and do some parallel language teaching, which they could take back into the workplace. That was fantastic. I've written a report about the project. If you need a reference, so you could see it.
Can I just supplement that? Because that's exactly one of the things that we found also in that study, that you would see examples of, arbejdsforlagt, so as we call it, so teaching that's put in the workplace. You'd see examples of teaching that would actually integrate the possible affordances of the workplace in the teaching, and that would work. But if you just move the ordinary type of language
Yeah.
teaching to the workplace without sort of adjusting the teaching itself, it doesn't make sense. I mean, it doesn't provide anything further, at least, than taking people to the language school. So there's some good findings about that as
Yeah.
well.
Interesting.
Yeah, 2 points actually. The first in regard to qualifications is that an interesting thing that's happened recently in Norway is that new integration law, which was implemented about a year ago. And the big difference there is that they're to a much larger extent actually emphasizing qualifications, both in terms of language learning and in terms of skills. So instead of saying we're going to get people out into the labor market as quickly as possible, that's their vision. The vision is we want people to be connected long term to the labor market. So step one is skills and formal qualifications. And of course, it's way too early to see what's that's going to lead to. But it's interesting to see. Sorry, but it's interesting to see that there seems to be a movement in that direction, at least in Norway. And in connection to that, there was a study made by the Nordic Council of Ministers this spring, saying that the country which has the largest emphasis on getting immigrants into the workplace, which is Denmark, is actually the one which has the lowest labor market numbers among refugees. So that was comparing quantitative data across, I don't think it was all the Nordic countries, but at least Sweden, Denmark, and I can't remember if it was, I think it was maybe more that was there. But that was also quite an interesting point there.
Can they still hear us?
They can hear us, but not very well.
Because over there, so.
Yeah,
Is that the?
this is the microphone
So
and
can we
the
move that?
speaker.
We can't.
We can move it a little bit, can we?
No, not.
Everyone needs.
Okay. It's off now. No,
No,
there it is. Very good. Green light. Green light, next question.
Okay,
Yeah.
then go ahead. I was thinking about the motivations of the employers, not the employees. Have you conducted any research on how willing they are to?
The employers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How, because it's obvious that, you need innovation on both sides. And I can just imagine that many employers are very busy with other things and that they are not so open towards. How does that work?
Well, I mean, the study I was talking about that we've done for the ministry, we included some employer perspectives as well, not as many as we would have liked, but the ones we did talk to, they all mentioned that language learning was something that you invested in when, for example, productions were going down because of, for example, Corona, and you had people there without anything to do. So what do? Instead of firing people or having to rehire them, you have them qualify in some kind of way, right? And then language could be one option. That was one perspective. The other perspective, which I think is the one on the rise, is that a lot of employers are realizing that actually being able to hire labor is to a larger and larger extent going to be dependent on your ability to integrate laborers with another ethnic background than the majority in the country, because we are talking about 80-90% of the workers in these types of workplaces that are now of another ethnic background. And companies are beginning to realize, okay, this is our future on this thing. And if we want to ensure productivity, efficiency, reduce sickness, reduce problems with security, we need to actually qualify people in order to, so they're beginning to invest in it, I think to a larger extent, the same way as they would invest in a new machine that is, prepared for the future. So there is a shift. Yes, exactly. Exactly. We need to kind of adapt to it. Yeah.
Right.
So I think there's a positive development in that
I
respect.
think this shift is very slow.
It's very slow.
Very
Yeah.
slow.
Yeah.
Most of the companies are not aware of that they could keep the workers much longer.
Exactly.
It would be much cheaper on the long range if they just put in them some language, and if they're arranging some language learning.
And the problem is that it's mostly the bigger companies that are able to make that kind of
Exactly.
investments. The smaller companies would need something like this that are flexible solutions, or they would need a more flexible language teaching system in the language schools where they can tap in and out whenever it fits production, for example. So I think there are some things that need to be changed on a structural level in order to.
Yeah, and one dimension of it also, of course, is that many employers are very open towards this and would very much like language teaching to take place. And some companies in Denmark have actually dedicated themselves to it. But in many cases, the next thing they say is that, but how do we do it? What is it we should do? And in Norway, what they call fellow mentors in the workplace. I've been to a meeting with them, and they all asked, we would very much like to help them with their language teaching. What should we do? How can we do it? So that kind of knowledge is also needed.
Yeah, I was curious about the application. And as concerns the experiment, you mentioned 4 hours.
That's because they right now.
How is it set up?
Yeah, it's set up so that they have 2 months of playing time, but they have to play a minimum of 4 hours in total. So the idea is that they can tap in and out, 10 minutes in the couch with the kids, 10 minutes in the bus, whatever, because in order again to be flexible in terms of their working schedules and stuff. So we've just set 4 hours as a minimum.
And that be able to register?
We can register in the game how much they play,
And my second question was, I may have missed something, I missed the beginning, but how costly is it to develop this kind of game? And how do
Good question.
I think that's implied in my comment in there in the plenary. It's really costly. It's really, really costly. And that's the primary barrier right now, as far as I can see, because in our dreams, right now we have a very, very small prototype of a game. But if we were to develop a full game, right now I think we spend about 2 or 3 million on those 2 prototypes. So if you need, and of course that's including the research time, and it would be different if we just did, the full game now. But I think, about 2-3 million to do like a full game. And a dream scenario would be to have one for laundry, one for cleaning, one for logistics, one for transport, one for healthcare, and you just spread it out there. But
And did you get funding for that, or how?
little by little. It's a long process.
Have we got Maria on now, or have they got their own group? So
No.
we're on our own?
I made 2 breakout rooms.
Yes.
One closed down pretty quickly, and I think
Okay.
Johanna.
So we are on our own.
We are here on our own.
Oh my God! I thought I could get some help.
But there is a second breakout room. Maria doesn't seem to be anymore in here.
Okay. So that's a pity. Okay. Who wants to say something?
Could you say something about the game elements of the game?
Yes, I can. And the best thing is really for you to go test it out when you're home. But I can give you some examples. For example, the laundry game. The first mini game that you step into is a sorting game. So there's like what do you call that? A transport. What do you call it? Transport. Conveyor belt. Yes. There's a conveyor belt that sort of drives throughout the screen, and then you have different baskets. And then items appear on the conveyor belt, and you get instructions. So take the white T-shirt and put it in the left basket. And then the levels, they become increasingly difficult on the orange basket, the one on the right, the one on the left. So it's all about familiarizing yourself with different items and navigating those items in relation to the baskets. So that's one example. It's really, really simple. And that was actually one of the challenges when we had to develop the game, because I looked at that game and I was like, oh God, they're going to be done in 2 minutes, And then we tested it out, and it just appears that, obviously, if you have no prerequisites, then just finding out what's the T-shirt and what's the pants can be a big challenge. So it's really, really simple gaming structure, and that's some of the things we want to work with to also develop that more. But another one is a memory game where you step into the office and then you're presented with a memory game with items, and then you have to find the right word And everything is done in a way so you don't have to be literate. So everything is visual and sound, which I think is one of the big advantages, because a lot of these migrant workers have no schooling experience. So.
But this is thinking in new ways, because you have to use the applications to get easier into this every single person in the workplace. Because if you just take the formal education, language education, and put it in the workplace, then you have to have people who's very different. If you normally have got a language school, you have 10, 20 classes where you can choose which class to go. But here you've got this amount of workers and one teacher, for instance. If you want more teachers and fewer, it will be very large costs. So we have to think in other ways. How can we teach everything to person for less time or more precisely, or whatever we could do to help every worker to do it on his or her way, and help them to have all the applications or internet things which can help them to.
Thank you so much for very interesting presentations. I think I work at UNESCO, and one of the key questions we keep receiving from policymakers, particularly those governments who do not want to invest a lot of money, and they don't also have fiscal capacity to do so, into design of literacy programs, even for their mother tongue speakers, for adults. And oftentimes they say, oh, we don't just want literacy development, we want skills development as well. So we cannot afford to send the adults, and adults have opportunity cost for going to literacy classes, language classes in this context, will be higher than actually if you don't get any support, social support in terms of financial support. So one of the issues which we looked at, and we published one compilation of cases, not specific for the migrant populations per se, but it was more about integration of skills development, as a range of skills, starting from vocational to soft skills, to and literacy. So what are the methodological approach? What are the approach in terms of curriculum design, teacher development, teacher training, and etc. Curriculum materials. What we found is the integration of that kind, I mean, of kind of skills meaning not language and literacy in this context, but a different type of skills, and language. A lot of programs claim that they are doing both, or many things. However, when you look at the really quality of learners' outcome engagement, you don't see much going on there in terms of either in terms of skills development or language on literacy acquisition. So because there are a lot of, we actually in the literature, I don't think there are a lot of really good materials and cases. And I think the ones which you described are very good examples to get inspirations from, because they many times people just assume that by taking formal language training or literacy training into workplace can solve a lot of problems, you know. But it's not the case. What your argument is about, and you don't just throw it in. You have to really engage with, create a lot of authentic materials and situations, real situations that we may be engaged in. So I just want to highlight that such cases are always welcome, to be honest, for many countries, many program providers, many teacher training institutions to develop ideas from. That's one comment I wanted to highlight. The question I have actually is very personal, that is based on my own work with in Afghanistan. I worked in Kabul with the Minister of Education in the design of mother tongue based literacy textbooks, numeracy textbooks. And I wanted, because games are oftentimes considered to be fun, and pleasure, combining with pleasure and learning is always better psychologically for the learner, because it makes you a bit relaxed, you know? Then learning without the pressure of being told that it's incorrect, correct, and it's more opportunity for making mistakes, I think. And I was told, no, it is not culturally appropriate.
Mm.
So they actually, they said, first of all, these are adults. They shouldn't be playing.
Mm.
Two, they don't actually, it's not a learning opportunity. My attempts to engage with the identifying games in their own local context for adults into materials for learning was not really successful. So I want to know how these migrants who are coming from, I'm sure, from refugee, from countries like Afghanistan, etc., even relate to the idea, principle of gamified language. Sorry.
I'm really happy you asked that question because I've had some almost tear-provoking examples of this when we started bringing the game to these workers. Once I went out there and we talked about, I'm doing this game, and it was a little abstract for them what it was, but the concept that somebody was doing something for them was mind-blowing. That was the first experience that I got about this, is that this is a group of people who are used to being tested, examined, tried in any kind of way, but they're not used to people designing things for them. And that was the first stepping stone, kind of to get them to just understand, this is actually not because I want to examine you, this is just because I want to do this for your convenience. So once we were, past that point and we worked on the game, and I came back with the game, and it was so interesting to see how the different people come, exactly building on your point, how the different people with different biographies and different, starting points with gaming responded to that. And what was really interesting was that some of the most quiet employees, so there was one participant in particular, Ruby, who was very quiet, and she knew a little Danish, but she was not saying anything. And once she started gaming, I could just see her laughing. And then as she was gaming and playing that game, after a while, she started talking. And it was just such a mind-blowing experience for me, this, seeing how, moving her out of the testing and performing kind of setting and into a gaming setting was, for her at least, quite liberating. So, and I'm not saying that that's across the board. That's kind of one of the things that we're curious about, how are people going to respond to this? But that experience for me told me that, at least for some people, this might be a really, really good solution. Though obviously not for all.
But could you make a distinction between two kinds of games, perhaps? Because there are games which are just games, and in many cases, perhaps adults will say, well, I'm not a child. I want to learn the language. Whereas this game is relevant.
It's relevant, but at the same time, we were very curious about whether this sort of the very animated design might be sort of estranging for some. But we chose to do it that way in order to not get into having to make things really graphically appropriate, because that makes things very much more expensive. So we kind of chose this cartoonish design, and it doesn't seem like it's having a bad effect, but I don't know.
Yeah.
But maybe it is the relevance that actually makes it.
I think that this is my
I hope,
this is my job. This is
Yeah,
my life.
yeah.
I can use that.
Yeah, I really want to thank you for making something that's accessible for people who cannot read and write, and who cannot read and write well. Because I'm a Norwegian teacher, I'm here with two colleagues, and we have our own tiny project about how to teach oral language in oral methods. Because this is a huge barrier in formal education, and it's always about literacy. And they have to learn and read and write first, of course. And never considering this takes years. And after years, you might be still on a very, very low level. And my students are not illiterate, but they have very weak school backgrounds. They have maybe finished primary schools, barely, but in a different alphabet. So for them to learn to speak and function through writing and reading, which is kind of, we believe, a huge blind spot in our education system. Everything has to go through that, which is extremely unpractical and time consuming, and many people never reach that.
That's funny, because in Denmark it's the opposite. We have got the spoken language at first. So the first two levels, they're only spoken.
In Denmark.
Okay.
Yeah, yes.
It's communicative.
I've heard about that,
Yeah.
and I'm jealous of you because in Norway, I think it's terrible. I'm almost ashamed of our system, which
It's funny there's that difference.
And then my mentor is here. She's also my colleague now, and she's really digging into this. She's over 60. She's been like, this is her heart. What you call it in English? I don't know, but. There's very few solutions to this, and when talking about illiterate people or people with low educations, or literacy is the answer, and it's very excluding policy,
And it might be realistic.
it's not realistic, and these people that we are talking about now are people with maybe some schooling, but schools in Eritrea are, they say so themselves after the independence that the quality is extremely low. It's very hard now in Norway. Many employers don't want to hire them, and they come to my class. I have a lot of people that the welfare department send back to us because they lost a job during COVID, and now they are not able to transfer to another job. Maybe they were somewhere and they were comfortable and they knew the boss and they were integrated there, but their skills are not good enough to kind of bring with them to a new place, sending them back to us. And then most teachers will take them through this long process of learning to read and write,
I think
which must be done as
you've got
well.
a common sense fight to find. I just
So,
have one more thing.
Mm.
You two are making contact between retired and immigrants. And I think those retired persons also have had a job. So they have got some skills from the work market.
Yes.
Is that part of it to discuss how to be in a workplace or how to act?
Yeah, some of it. So we're from the Danish Red Cross.
Yeah, maybe you should tell a little bit what you do.
And we have, we're working in Copenhagen, and we have volunteers at our language trainings cafes in Denmark. But we also have online language training where they can, migrants and the refugees can book a volunteer and then they talk online for half an hour. And when they have talked one time, they can talk together again. They can just agree on your work all the time. So what we have tried also on that platform, it's called Språkkraft, is to match. So if you have a migrant or refugee that's interested in healthcare, you can book a volunteer that have worked in the area, and then they can talk about healthcare related, work related language.
Just another way to use the internet and to use the skills from retired people who wants to give their skills to someone else.
Yeah, I think in relation to the problem you mentioned, perhaps we should look at some experiences with creating different learning environments. In 2 days, there will be a conference in Oslo where I'll be talking about a project for women. And it combined that group of women with very little school background, some of them illiterate, and they were combined in a group, and they were very good at cooking. That was a skill they really had. And so those skills were put into a learning environment which consisted of a classroom, which in one end was a kitchen and the other end an ordinary classroom. And there was a professional cook, a woman, to teach them to professionalize their everyday knowledge. Gradually.
We have several projects like that at my work.
Yeah.
We have that.
Okay.
Yes.
And then language teaching and learning was included in the project. And then they prepared the food after having bought the things they needed and got some information, some professional information about cooking. And then gradually they began catering. And after having done that, they were ready for the labor market. So all the necessary skills a little bit of literacy, a little bit of more professional qualification of their everyday experience, more cognitive ways of approaching the profession and the world, and language learning as an integral part of it, and catering as a practical part of it, really changed their whole development. It's a fantastic process.
Yeah, but we have that, and I want to say one thing, it doesn't always work, because I think we have still not developed an oral pedagogy which is well enough. I mean, we do it a little bit. Another colleague was doing that thing that you are describing, but all too often there is too much written material that you depend on that. And maybe it seems like a small thing to us, but it becomes huge obstacles.
Yeah.
You have to, and there is too little weight on the interaction part of it, like you showed.
Yeah.
So we have even a canteen, we have had so many projects, but very few people actually get to that level. And we believe that it's because the oral pedagogy itself, without any written materials, is what is needed, and that has not yet been developed. It's only us who are interested who are doing it. But the other people, if you are not so into that or tuned into that, as we believe that you need to be, then it doesn't necessarily take you to that level, because cooking for women is very widespread, but the effect is not always as good as we want. So
I think that what you're saying is so interesting, because I think you see that a lot in Sweden as well. I have a colleague who worked for 40 years in Luxembourg, and she says this is exactly what should be done. And she's also like, you're older colleague, like, why do we have to do this? Sit for 10 years and try to make somebody read and write. We should change. Maybe we should have a major shift.
Yes.
And that's what I'm thinking.
Yes.
What you're saying, that there should be some kind of shift in the pedagogy for illiterates, so that we do oral pedagogy instead, that you don't have these expectations that everybody should be at the B1 level. I mean, it's maybe just a waste of everyone's time.
Yes.
I don't know, I'm being a bit drastical here, but I'm thinking that maybe we need some kind of drastical shift. Because we put in so many hours.
Yes.
And maybe this would create better opportunities for these people.
I believe that, and I want to add, because we talk about illiterates, it's kind of obvious, but my group is people then, as I said, they can read and write in their own language, but they're on a low level. So then they are not really treated as illiterates, but their level is still not. So I think they should be more included. I mean, I think there's not like a sharp divide between illiterate and people who have low education.
So you have to tell the government that this way to learn language, what you do in Norway today, is the academic way.
Yes.
We need another way too. And the spoken language is the most important thing to get in touch with the locals.
And I can just say one more sentence. That's even the academics there are complaints from employers on them too, because the education is so based on written materials that even they don't communicate as well as they should. So it's like it should be for literates, but it should be for all groups, a more oral based pedagogy, I think.
But it's a little bit surprising, isn't it? Because we've been talking about communicative competence for 30, 40 years.
Yes.
So why is our teaching not, does not reflect what we actually know about working with?
That's the very big question. Why don't we do what we know we should do?
That must be some of the last.
Because we're ourselves.
Yes.
That's what.
I think that's the.
I'm very curious, what you say that you have a very good example of a teacher coming into the workplace and making a parallel teaching. How does this teaching look like? How is it, what other
At
characteristics?
the elderly people's home.
Yeah, I know, but
Yeah,
how does it
yeah.
look like? What does the
Well,
picture do?
one thing is, when you have a break, the teacher asks, what are the themes you're talking about?
Mm.
Well, we talk about the weather, we talk about this and that, okay. How do we talk about the weather? How do we talk about these various issues? And then we train that, so that next time there is a break, I will be able to do that. When you have, as Louisa mentioned, a meeting with our colleagues about the situation of the individual people, what exactly is that about? What do we talk about? And then we make some communicative activities where we actually train that kind of language. And there was one person who had a conflict with one of her Danish colleagues, and brought that conflict into the language teaching room. And then they used a reflection diagram, which was what happened in the situation, who said that, what was good, what was bad, what could be done next time, and so on. So it was an oral reflection on what happened and what could you do next time. So all the kinds of things that they experienced with their daily work was reflected in, so they could immediately use what they use for language teaching, take it back into their job. And I think it's important to see this connection between those two spaces, because the working space is limited by having to be efficient, and therefore there's not so much time for language teaching and reflection and so on. Whereas the language learning space is a more open space, where you can discuss your experiences, where you can take up whatever problems you may have language-wise. And there is time and resources for dealing with that. And then you can take it back into workroom. One of my publications is about what exactly happened in that project. So it's in Danish.
I've got one teacher who's using the mobile phones. They're all her students is on the elderly home, and she has told them, take some small movies about what is happening and upload them to me. And the next time we're together, just one of these small videos is enough to 3 or 4 lessons. Because there's so much communication in them and so much speaking in it. So it's wonderful to see. You just had to ask people. You can do everything you will if you ask them. Normally you have to have some written contract and whatever, but if they go to the elderly and say, can I use this for my language? It's just me and my teacher and my colleagues. Can we use this? Yeah, okay. Then take a picture of what they're doing. That's something you shouldn't take a picture of, but okay. Situation which would be real, and the teacher has to find the best situations. And then the teacher has got all the time she needs to prepare herself. And then you get wonderful language lessons.
One quick, I think he's here.
Yeah.
So very quickly, I just want to, I think we should, I do agree. A lot of us here, we are literate already. We develop our literacy as young children. We learned our mother tongue not by reading and writing. We learn by listening.
Yes.
And I think there are some probably ideas for ourselves to go back to how children acquire language, mother tongue, anyone, in terms of identifying opportunities for oral pedagogy.
Yes.
And also another way to also recognize, I think, is majority of the migrants, I mean, especially from the countries like Eritrea, Afghanistan, where some of them are still very strong oral tradition.
Yes.
Also, I come from very strong oral traditions, but I got education during the Soviet times. Or written, my parents were teachers, so I'm very much from written culture, cultural context of the family. But what I realized actually more and more is learning another language. When I was learning Russian, I learned through TV. I grew up in a monolingual Kyrgyz context. and TV and songs picked up faster. Even though my language classes in school were there, but the teacher was teaching half of the time she was speaking Kyrgyz. And English, which was totally foreign language to me. Nobody spoke anywhere. I forget about in my village, even in the city where I was there. So one thing I noticed now, I'm thinking, I took German classes, and now I'm taking French classes. There is a lot of emphasis immediately to start with written language.
Yeah.
And I think that is actually very wrong. And in Denmark, the other way around, I think really, we need to understand how that is being developed and identify models of teaching and didactic methods. One element for me, actually, oftentimes is about not just a lot about game or TV watching or listening to the songs, etc. It's more about conversing.
Yes.
And I think just giving an opportunity to converse in a situation where you feel safe, and you have opportunity to make mistakes. And that is actually not being corrected all the time, because the more time you give correction, the less, for the basic learners, immediately they lose their interest and motivation. You know, they're like, I failed, I cannot do it.
Yes.
I think that emotional state is very critical, I think. Another component which I also noticed that role play, drama, I mean, whatever language resource, we heard very interesting presentation about multilingualism. People come with multilingual practices and experience and biographies, I think, enable that more, I think, more opportunities for such multilingual practice to happen. But then, teacher, this is where we go back to the teacher, how the quality of the teacher impacts the language learning of the students, migrants in this question is that how creatively the teachers can use that opportunity. I think that's where the emphasis could be also made. I would wonder whether in Denmark teachers are more trained teachers versus in Norway or Sweden or any other country where they are not. I mean, I'm just raising these issues because there are a lot of factors in impact.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I was looking for some space to break in. You have been very good speaking a lot. So nice to be here.